Welcome to a place where love is not ordinary, where silence turns into fire, where one summer night can change everything forever. These are not just stories, they are confessions, whispered in the voice of hearts that dared to feel when the world told them not to. A single knock at the door, a gaze that once carried innocence, now heavy with desire, long nights beneath the moonlight where restraint slowly unravels into stolen touches, unspoken truths, and passion that cannot be denied. A night where skin meets skin, breaking years of silence, awakening intimacy thought to be lost forever, and a bond born in secrecy beyond judgment, beyond age, where passion meets devotion and nothing will ever be the same again. If you've ever longed for love that consumes both body and soul, you are in the right place. It was one of those summer nights when the air hangs heavy with silence, broken only by the soft hum of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves. The house felt larger than it should, every room echoing with the kind of quiet that presses against the skin. Sitting by the window, the glow of the setting sun still lingering on the horizon, there was no expectation for anything out of the ordinary. Life had become routine, predictable, wrapped in layers of solitude that had become both a comfort and a cage. Then came the sound, a knock at the door, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady, a presence that carried weight even before the door was opened. On the other side stood him the younger neighbor, framed by the fading orange light. He had come countless times before, with casual greetings and neighborly gestures, but that night something in his eyes was different. The boyish ease was gone. In its place was a quiet intensity that made time pause. The smile that rose on his lips carried warmth, but his gaze lingered longer than it should have, holding steady as if he could see through every layer carefully built to guard against moments like this. That gaze unsettled everything. Once it had been innocent, the kind of look exchanged in passing, polite and without weight. But on that summer night it was fire, a sudden, unspoken heat that slipped into the room before he even stepped inside. Conversation started as it always did, simple words, nothing unusual. Something about the garden, the weather, the small things neighbors talk about when filling the spaces between silences. But the silences that night were not empty. They were charged, alive, humming with something forbidden. Each pause stretched longer, pulling both into a quiet gravity that neither wanted to acknowledge aloud. There was a moment when the light from the porch caught his face, shadowing one side while illuminating the other. The sharpness of his jaw, the subtle strength in the way he stood, details that had always been there but had never been seen in this way. Suddenly, everything seemed sharper, clearer, as if the night itself had shifted focus. Every gesture, every glance carried weight. A breeze moved through the open door, brushing against skin, lifting strands of hair, but it wasn't the wind that caused the shiver. It was the way his eyes followed, unblinking, steady, pulling closer without a step taken. There was no need for words in that instant. Desire was not spoken, it was felt. It burned in the chest, in the way breaths grew shorter, in the way the air between seemed to shrink, though neither had moved. He leaned against the doorframe, casually at first, but even that simple act felt different. It was no longer neighborly. It was bold, edged with something dangerous. There was no denying it now. This was not the gaze of someone passing by. This was the gaze of someone drawn in, pulled toward a line that shouldn't be crossed yet was already blurring. The conversation stumbled. Words faltered, replaced by smiles that said more than sentences could. And then came the silence again, that heavy, pulsing quiet that spoke of everything neither dared to name. A spark flickered, not just in thought, not just in imagination, but in reality. It was alive, undeniable, and it filled the night. The warmth of the air felt different now, heavier, pressing. Every detail heightened the faint scent of summer flowers drifting from outside, the soft creak of the porch beneath shifting weight, the way the distant sound of laughter from another house only made the closeness sharper. Each moment carved itself into memory, etched deeper than any ordinary night should allow. Innocence had slipped away quietly, without warning. A simple visit had turned into something else, a storm brewing beneath the calm, a fire hidden behind steady eyes. The line between ordinary and forbidden had vanished, and in its place was a hunger neither could deny. It was just a gaze, just a look exchanged in the soft darkness of a summer night, but it carried everything. It held loneliness and longing, desire and danger, all wrapped together in silence. That gaze reached into places long forgotten, places buried beneath years of quiet endurance, and set them ablaze. From that moment, nothing felt the same. What had once been casual, familiar, had transformed into something electric. The door between them was still open, but it was no longer about neighbors, no longer about routine. It was about two souls standing on the edge of something that could never be undone. And all it took was one spark, one look, one summer night. Nothing was ever the same again. The porch had always been a quiet refuge, a place where nights passed slowly beneath the soft silver light of the moon. It was where silence once stretched endlessly, but after that summer evening, silence became something else entirely. It was no longer empty, it was alive. It was charged with words unsaid, with feelings that could no longer be hidden, and with the quiet thrum of two hearts beginning to lose their careful restraint. Conversations began innocently, as they always had. Simple stories about the day, the neighbors, the small happenings that filled ordinary lives. Yet the longer the words flowed, the deeper they began to sink. Questions that once skimmed the surface now reached beneath it. He asked about memories, about dreams, about the kind of things no one had asked in years. And in answering, the walls that had been built so carefully began to thin, one layer at a time. The air grew warmer, not just with the heat of summer, but with the closeness that formed between us. Every laugh felt different, softer and heavier at once, lingering in the chest long after the sound faded. His voice was steady, low, carrying through the night like a secret meant only for me, and in that voice was a pull, something that kept me from wanting the night to end. The space between us began to shrink, not with sudden movements, but with a slow inevitability, a shift of a chair closer, a lean across the table, an arm brushing too near. Each time it happened, there was a pause, a heartbeat caught between fear and longing. But neither pulled away. Instead, the pauses grew shorter, and the closeness stayed longer. The moonlight fell across his face, sharp and soft all at once, and I found myself memorizing details I had once ignored: the curve of his lips, the way his eyes caught the faint glow, the quiet strength in his hands resting against the wood of the chair. Every detail seemed magnified under the night sky, and every glance that lingered spoke louder than any word he had said. Restraint still lived in the air, fragile and trembling, but it unraveled with every passing moment. A hand brushing against mine when he reached across the table to emphasize a point lingered longer than it should have. That fleeting touch carried weight, sparking warmth that spread far deeper than skin. Neither of us acknowledged it with words, but neither of us pulled back. The silence after spoke more than confession ever could. The rhythm of the night changed. Where once it had been conversation and comfortable laughter, it became something slower, heavier, filled with tension that hummed just beneath the surface. Words began to slip into places they never had before, confessions whispered like secrets. Stories of loneliness, of longing, of moments spent feeling unseen, and in those shared truths there was a closeness that no amount of restraint could undo. Every heartbeat seemed louder, every breath heavier, as if the night itself was pushing us closer. His eyes would hold mine, steady and unflinching, until I could no longer tell whether the world outside still existed. The only thing real was that gaze, that pull, that quiet fire growing stronger in the shadows of the porch. At some point, the distance between us was gone. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't reckless. It was slow, like the tide creeping forward until it finally touches the shore. His hand brushed mine again, this time deliberate, fingers curling gently around my own. The warmth of his skin was a confession in itself, a wordless vow that broke through years of silence. No words were spoken, none were needed. The unspoken had already been said in every look, in every pause, in every lingering touch. The restraint that had once felt like safety was gone, stripped away by the simple truth that this closeness was no longer avoidable. It was wanted, needed, inevitable. The night stretched on, but it no longer felt endless. Time slipped away unnoticed as we sat there, hands entwined, hearts racing faster than any conversation could follow. The world outside had disappeared, leaving only the sound of crickets in the distance and the quiet storm building between us. When his thumb traced gently across my hand, I felt every ounce of longing I had tried to bury come alive again. It wasn't just desire, it was something deeper, something that reached into places untouched for so long. It was the awakening of something that had waited patiently, hidden beneath years of restraint. The porch became more than wood and railings that night. It became the place where boundaries broke, where silence gave way to truth, where two lives shifted in a direction that could never be undone. What started as conversation under the moonlight had become the unraveling of every wall carefully built, and with every touch, every glance, every unspoken confession, restraint slipped further away until it was gone entirely. That was the night when the heart learned to beat louder than words. The night had the kind of stillness that makes every sound sharper, every breath heavier. The moon hung above like a quiet witness, casting silver shadows across the porch where we had spent so many evenings talking. But this night was different. Something invisible pressed closer between us, something that had been building slowly, patiently, and had finally reached the point where silence could no longer hold it back. His hand was still in mine from the moment earlier, when restraint had begun to slip away. Neither of us had let go. That simple connection pulsed with something far greater than casual touch. It was alive, it was burning, it was calling for more. My pulse throbbed in my ears, loud enough to drown out every cricket, every rustle of the trees. It was as if the entire world had faded, leaving only the weight of his gaze and the warmth of his skin against mine. When he leaned closer, there was no hesitation left. His breath brushed my cheek, warm and steady, carrying with it the truth neither of us had dared to speak. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the kind of anticipation that shakes through every nerve. And then his lips touched mine, soft at first, tentative as though asking permission, but the moment they met, years of silence shattered. The kiss deepened, slow at first, then stronger, urgent, hungry. My hands rose without thought, finding the strength of his shoulders, the curve of his neck, pulling him closer. The world around us disappeared. The porch, the night, the distance that had defined us for so long, it all fell away in that single moment. It was nothing but fire and closeness, the raw truth of desire breaking free. His arms wrapped around me, firm and certain, and for the first time in years, I felt held in a way that wasn't polite or restrained, but needed with a force that could not be denied. The heat of his body pressed against mine, every inch of closeness undoing years of loneliness, years of quiet endurance. The night became ours alone, and in it was a passion that no amount of caution could smother. We moved inside without words, hands never parting, lips finding each other again and again, each kiss deeper, each touch bolder. The air was thick, charged with the kind of energy that comes only when longing has been locked away too long. His hands traced the curve of my back, my arms, my face, as if memorizing every part of me with reverence and hunger intertwined. The first time his skin touched mine, bare against bare, a shiver tore through me. It was more than just sensation, it was awakening. Every nerve seemed to come alive, every forgotten part of myself lit with a fire I thought had been lost forever. His touch was not careless, not rushed, but deep, deliberate, filled with a tenderness that made the passion burn even brighter. Breath tangled with breath as we found each other, as restraint gave way to a surrender that felt like both release and discovery. It wasn't just desire, it was recognition, connection, the undeniable truth that two souls had collided in a way that no silence, no years, no boundaries could ever erase. The night stretched endlessly, filled with moments that blurred together the heat of his lips against my neck, the strength of his hands holding me close, the sound of his voice breaking with quiet confessions between kisses. Every second was imprinted, seared into memory, carrying both the thrill of passion and the weight of something far deeper. When passion finally stilled, when bodies rested against each other in the hush of the early hours, the silence returned. But it was no longer the silence of loneliness. It was full, warm, wrapped in the rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my ear. The night that began with fire ended with peace, with a closeness that went beyond skin, beyond desire, into the place where love is born. It was the night that changed everything. Nothing was ever the same again. It began with nothing more than a knock at the door, a sound so simple, so ordinary, yet one that shifted the entire course of life. Standing there was someone younger, someone who should have remained only a neighbor, someone who should have been nothing more than passing conversation and polite smiles. But from the very first night, something stirred that could not be denied. What started as small talk under the summer moon became nights that stretched into hours, conversations that slipped deeper and deeper until the lines of age, of expectation, of what the world would think, all blurred into irrelevance. Each word revealed pieces of ourselves that had been hidden for too long, secrets that spilled like water finally breaking through a dam. It wasn't supposed to go beyond the porch, beyond stolen glances and laughter that lingered too long, but it did. The bond grew quietly, like a flame sheltered from the wind, burning brighter in its secrecy. Every moment carried both danger and sweetness, every touch hidden yet unforgettable. There was no denying the fire of passion, the way his lips searched for mine with urgency, the way his hands traced every curve of my body as if learning me by heart. But what surprised me most was not the heat of desire. It was the devotion beneath it, the way he looked at me not with fleeting hunger, but with a reverence that reached into my very soul. The world outside would have judged it, condemned it, labeled it something shameful. They would have said the years between us were too many, that love had no place here, that passion was misplaced. But in those nights, wrapped in his arms, there was no judgment, no age, no rules. There was only truth, raw, unshakable, undeniable truth. Every time he touched me, I felt more than skin against skin. I felt seen, cherished, wanted in ways that went beyond the physical. His voice, low and certain in the quiet hours, carried promises that no one else had ever dared to make. He spoke not just of desire, but of connection, of the way his heart beat faster when mine was near, of the way he felt whole only when we were together. Our love lived in secrecy, hidden behind closed doors, but it was no less real. In fact, the secrecy seemed to make it burn brighter, stronger, as if guarding it against the world gave it even more power. Every knock at the door, every step across the threshold, carried the same rush of anticipation, the same knowledge that once inside, we belonged completely to one another. There were nights when passion consumed us entirely, where bodies tangled until morning light spilled across the room, reminding us of the world we'd have to face. But there were also quiet moments, tender and still, where he would simply hold me, tracing lines across my skin with fingertips soft as whispers, and I knew then that this was more than desire. It was love, fierce, loyal, and unyielding. Love that ignored the calendar, love that silenced the voices of judgment, love that made every stolen second worth the risk. The truth is, I never expected it. I never thought love would come knocking again, especially not in a form the world would never understand. But it did, and it wasn't fleeting, it wasn't fragile. It was strong, unshakable, and it wrapped itself around both passion and devotion like two vines growing together, impossible to separate. In his eyes, I saw no numbers, no years, no divide. I saw only a reflection of myself as I truly was, not older, not forgotten, but alive, desired, worthy of love in its deepest form. And in giving myself to him, I found pieces of life I thought were gone forever. It began with a single knock at the door. It became a bond of body and soul, and from that moment on, nothing was ever the same again. If this story touched your heart, if it stirred something deep inside you, then you know love has no rules, no limits, no boundaries. It can come in silence, in fire, in longing, or in the knock of a single night, and when it does, nothing is ever the same. Stay with us, because here, every story is a journey into passion, intimacy, and the kind of devotion the world rarely dares to speak of. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next story that will move your heart and awaken your soul.